Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Noble, and I will be the host for this TLC session, Accessing Accommodations, a Framework for Faculty, presented by Rachel Orlansky, Director of Student Access and Wellness. We're excited that you have joined us today to hear Rachel. The chat window will be open during the session, so please feel free to participate or ask questions. Rachel, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. So as Mike said, I'm Rachel Orlansky. I am the Director of Student Access and Wellness, and I've been at Ashford for a little over a year now. Prior to Ashford, I worked in disability services really in higher education for over 10 years, bringing mostly experience from ground campuses or a ground campus. So definitely have that perspective for folks who have questions around that. Today, I'll be talking about the process here. Wanted to get started with, for those of you in the room who have taught classes here before, wanted to get a sense of how many of you have received an authorized accommodation form from a student before. So I thought I'd kick us off just getting a sense of who's in the room and what are folks' knowledge base around an accommodation request, an authorized accommodation form. Awesome, thanks for answering. So it seems like for those of you that have taught classes before, more than half of you have received an authorized accommodation form and 2 of you have not. I guess I can share those results with you all. Awesome. So that just helps me kind of get a sense of what folks' familiarity is with the topic. So I'm just going to close this out from my perspective. Okay, so to kick us off today, I thought I would start from our where we're coming from, right? So our Office of Access and Wellness is upholding disability laws, the 2 most important of which are Section 504 of the National Rehabilitation Act of '73, and of course the Americans with Disabilities Act. And these 2 laws require that institutions of higher education provide access to students with disabilities, really in and out of the classroom. So not sure how many of you have seen a graphic like this before, but the perspective that we're taking in Access and Wellness and really across the institution more broadly is one of equity versus equality. I love this graphic. I just love the visual representation of what is equal for all is definitely not accessible for all. And in providing equity, you're providing somebody what they need to be able to access. And that may be different for different folks, especially with different learning styles, especially with different disabilities. In disability services in higher ed, we've always talked about leveling the playing field. And I like to think about it as really having access to the playing field. And so I love that this graphic really demonstrates the playing field part of it. So in supporting our students with disabilities at Ashford, we are, as I said, ensuring that students have access. We want to know who our students are, what they're bringing with them when they come here, and then providing our tailored and comprehensive support to those students. Those are really our goals within Access and Wellness. And also feel free, I know Mike mentioned that the chat will be open. Do not feel like you need to wait till the end to ask questions. I'm very happy to look at the chat while this is going. So for those of you that work, perhaps still work or have worked on a ground campus in addition to Ashford, there are reasons that students choose an online program. And there are reasons that students with disabilities would choose an online program even more so. So think about some of our student population, students who may be experiencing chronic illnesses, mental health issues, physical disabilities, things that would require frequent or even perhaps unpredictable medical appointments, unpredictable symptoms, medication side effects. All of these components could impact a student's ability to attend class. So if you think about a traditional ground campus where classes meet at a specified day on a specified time, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9:40 to 11:10, given the symptoms that I'm experiencing at this time, that's going to make it nearly impossible for me to go to college, to access higher education. So if those are some of the things that I'm managing and I'm able to access my classroom and participate in my class at times that make sense to me, on days where I'm feeling good, that's going to increase my ability to be successful. And when we talk to students, we know this is a major reason that students choose a program like Ashford, where they can have such autonomy over when they access the classroom and participate in the classroom. To talk a little bit our process for requesting authorized accommodations. So for the group of you who've said that they've received an authorized accommodation form from a student requesting accommodations in the classroom, this is how a student would get to the point of having that document to provide you with. So it begins with the student submitting an accommodation request form. That is the document that indicates to our office that the student is at least interested in inquiring about what accommodations we offer, talking through our process, etc. So if any of you have ever made a referral to our office, and any staff or faculty can make referrals, and students can also self-refer to our office, that's going to prompt an outreach call and email to that student. And that information is all going to indicate, in order to begin the process with our office, you need to submit an accommodation request form. Once we receive that accommodation request form, and sometimes with documentation included in that, then our office will connect that student with an access and wellness counselor. That person will be assigned a specific counselor, and that counselor will reach out to that student and will conduct a comprehensive structured interview where the counselor gains information about perhaps what accommodations students have accessed at other universities, perhaps in high school or even middle school, talk about what accommodations would be most beneficial, go through any documentation that that student has provided. Many times that looks like a full battery of psychoeducational testing for learning disabilities or ADHD. It also can look like medical documentation. Anyone, medical provider, psychologist, etc., would provide us with documentation around the students, what they're experiencing, and most importantly, what that impact is on the academics. If after that conversation, we deem that that student is indeed eligible for accommodations, we would then fill out our draft accommodation form, where we mentioned with the student exactly what accommodations they're going to be eligible for. We send that form to them, student signs that draft accommodation form, sends it back to us, at which point they receive their authorized accommodation form. When we send them their authorized accommodation form, we talk about implementation and expectations. And that's, again, where you're going to see this accommodation form. So for a student who wants to pursue accommodations in the classroom, they'd need to provide you with their authorized accommodation form. We talk about how accommodations are not retroactive, meaning if a student were to provide you with their authorized accommodation form in week 4, they would not have been eligible for accommodations prior to week 4, but would be for 4 and 5. Our authorized accommodation forms are valid for 1 year. So when you see them, you'll see the date at which that accommodation form was initiated and the date in which it expires. What that tells us to do is, in that 1 year, if perhaps we haven't connected with the student, we'll reach out to the student, confirm that these accommodations are helpful, they're using them, there isn't different ones or a change in accommodations that would be beneficial for their success. Update that accommodation form after that conversation and send the updated form to the student. If you're ever receiving an authorized accommodation form that looks out of date, totally appropriate to ask the student for an updated form. It may be that they just haven't seen that the updated one or connected with their counselor. If they do have an outdated form, it does indicate that they are authorized for accommodations, but again, to encourage them to connect with their counselor so that they can update that form would be super helpful for us. So just to give you a sense of some of the most common accommodations that we offer through Access and Wellness, those of you who've received these authorized accommodation forms will see these accommodations listed, and we'll show you which accommodations students are eligible for. Not uncommon to any institution of higher education, extended time is the most common accommodation, and that's both to complete assignments, quizzes, exams, and discussions. And because of the way our classes run around a very predictable timeline around when things are due in the classroom, our authorized accommodation forms indicate, aside from just time and a half, which we generally indicate for students, we'll say what that looks like for assignments. So that for discussion posts, they have 2 days, for assignments, they have 4, etc. It'll spell that out really clearly in the authorized accommodation form. Other things we do for students around accommodations that you may not see in the classroom are around accessible course materials. Most of our materials in the classroom are now digital materials, and for many students that is already amazingly accessible. Some students require a hard copy text of their for an accommodation of the textbook based on whatever their disability is, and so we are still providing hard copy textbooks for certain students with accommodations if it's only a digital material, in the reverse. So for classrooms that still have only a hard copy text available and need to use an e-text for screen reader or different software, we'll provide that student with an e-text or an accessible version of that. Caption materials and transcripts actually are generally provided already in the classroom. Because our curriculum is developed in-house, we have the amazing benefit of having a really universally designed classroom that has an already very accessible format for students to access videos, anything that's in the classroom. And if a student or if you are in a classroom and realize that something doesn't feel accessible, certainly let us know so that we can help fix that. Every so often we do have alternate assignments and course substitution. It's a very rare accommodation, but does happen. There were a few courses that had assignments that were completely based on watching and listening to a video, and so we needed to do some different things there, and we have some pieces around math. And if you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer them, but don't want to spend too much time on it because, like I said, it is very uncommon. And then, of course, we're providing support and advocacy. So students who need to, this is an experience that students need to self-advocate. Students need to let their instructors know, these are accommodations that I'm eligible for, this is what I hope to use, this is how I plan to do it. Communicating with you, communicating with us. Then it's really our job to help the student be able to advocate for themselves and connect them with resources internally and externally as appropriate for whatever they're managing at the time. So from your end on faculty implementation and support, it's the student's responsibility to, like I said, provide you with their authorized accommodation form. Hopefully the student's providing the form once at the start of the course, but many times students are not doing that. There's a variety of reasons that a student wouldn't provide it at the beginning of the course. Perhaps they don't think they'll need to use accommodations in the course. They want to give it a go without it. There are a lot of reasons for doing so, but in that sense, accommodations are also not retroactive. So generally, we are trying to coach students who are on the fence about whether or not they want to provide their authorized accommodation form. We're really recommending to students, if there is a chance that you're going to access your accommodations or going to need to access your accommodations, it's really of benefit to you to provide those as close to the start of the course as possible. If you don't use them, awesome. But if you are going to need them, they're not going to be retroactive. And by the time you realize, oh my goodness, I'm having a major flare-up around my chronic illness, it may be too late to then access those accommodations. Also very important for you to know that we are here to partner with students, but we are also here to partner with you. We do have numbers of faculty reach out to our office to ask questions around how they can support students, how they can encourage students to use our office, how they can have really meaningful conversations around what it looks like to use those accommodations in the classroom. And just want you to know that we are here to partner with you as much as we are to partner with students and make ourselves available to you for that. I wanted to go back to one piece, and I must have somehow gotten rid of this slide inadvertently, but to talk about some of the common disabilities that students do present here. And so there's your typical, we have our learning disabilities and our ADHD. We also have students who are blind or low vision, students who are deaf or hard of hearing, Students, like I said, with chronic medical conditions that can impact their ability to be successful academically. We have students experiencing mental health conditions. We have students who have temporary accommodations, perhaps related to an injury they've experienced after a car accident, pregnancy, different things that ebb and flow can require temporary accommodations. And we also work with a fair number of our military students who may have duty-related injuries, may be experiencing PTSD, and actually have one dedicated counselor on our team who works with our military students. She's actually our manager of military student access and wellness. And so our military students who are also using services through our office are working in particular with one counselor who knows that population extremely well. So did want to touch on that with you all. I have a good amount of time for questions. Really want to be able to tailor any of the rest of this presentation to folks out there. Questions that you might have, concerns you wanted to address, definitely feel free to type them in the chat. I have my chat box open. I'm happy to address questions from there.
All right. Well, Rachel, I actually have a question for you. It's just from I'll throw this out there until someone else types in or joins in. Just as a faculty support and development associate, I constantly get questions from faculty regarding the late assignments. And I was wondering, you mentioned the most common accommodation that is granted by your office is extended time. Could you maybe talk about how extended time relates to the late policy for assignments and the final paper in a class?
Thank you so much for that, Mike. We also get that question all the time. So students with accommodations for around extended time who are given an additional 2 or 4 days, etc., for their assignments are still subject to the late penalty after that assignment is due. So if I'm a student with accommodation and I have an extra 2 days to turn in to submit my discussion post, but I do it after 3 days, then I would be subject to whatever the late policy is for that particular class, college, etc. So it's not that after that time that I should receive a 0, it's that I should be graded with the late penalty. Additionally, what you'll see on many authorized accommodation forms, especially for students with extended time, is a pre-authorized incomplete. If the student is meeting the guidelines or the threshold for an incomplete in the course. So if a student with an accommodation for a pre-authorized incomplete is passing the class at the end of the course but needs additional time to work on their final assignment, they should remind you that they're eligible for that accommodation and ask that you fill out the incomplete request form and ask that you grant them an incomplete in that course in order to finish up their assignments. This is very common. If I have extended time in a course and these courses are so quick, it is very likely that I'm going to need time after the end of the course to complete my final assignment. From a back-end piece, so our counselors are coaching students in that situation to take a break before they take their next course. Because the last thing that we want is for a student with extended time accommodation to be working on a final assignment from their previous course and starting a new course and ending up behind from the get-go. So that is why that's there in place. We know that students with extended time may very well need more time for their final assignment and therefore have pre-authorized them for an incomplete if they are passing the class at the end of the course. If they're failing the course at that time, it's still instructor discretion. If you feel like you want to continue working with the student and provide them an incomplete, that's absolutely your authority to do so, but you do not have to. But if they are passing the course at that time and do ask for their pre-authorized incomplete, it is important that you go ahead and file an incomplete for them as their final grade so that they continue to work on that.
I think that's some great information. Does anyone else from the audience have any questions? Please feel free to go ahead and type those in. Rachel, is it okay if I ask another one?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I help faculty a lot, and often we're the first people that they reach out to. That's why I'm asking these questions. It's for my own benefit. I'm doing it a little selfishly, but One of the questions that comes to mind is that we're all concerned about retention of students, because that's really what we do here, right? We're meant to be a service to students to help them become better critical thinkers, and we do that through engaging them in the class, and retaining them is how we keep them moving forward in their progress, right? So can you talk maybe about how you see access and wellness impacting that retention?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, wow, that's a really long comment. I'll read that in 1 second. Research has shown for a long time that students who are able to connect with a person where they are going to school is more likely to stay and be successful where they are. And I think for many times that is a faculty member, for many times it's their academic advisor, and for many students it's their access and wellness counselor. So to be able to find a person to connect with, and whether that's around their disability, whether it's around different issues they may be experiencing, whether it's around building time management skills, I think that connecting a student to access and wellness is just an additional level of support and connection that could offer more opportunities to feel successful in school. Felicia Banks, let me read your comment really quickly. I don't know that it's beneficial to read it out loud, but students who may be homeless, thank you so much for advocating for students. I tend to be very flexible. However, I know and understand the policy is set at 30 days may be a bit extensive. I believe that it could do more harm than having 30 days, and I would suggest a 2-week extension. It's really interesting, Felicia. Thank you for bringing that up. Actually, just recently having conversations around the 30-day incomplete, and definitely understand where you're coming from, and that's why we were having conversations around it. And I think for students who are truly taking a break between courses to spend the time on completing that assignment, I don't worry as much about it doing damage. I think that having 30 days and beginning a new class during that is where it becomes problematic. And so that's kind of what we're trying to tease out right now. The 30 days is essentially the length of almost another class. And so far, the reason that we haven't decided to change it is that if you're talking about a traditional semester system, mostly a student has many students have at least the entire other semester to finish a course if they have an incomplete. At the minimum, what I've seen in my work on those semesters or terms is that they have about this amount of time, 4 weeks into the next term, including the break in between. So it feels like a lot. It also seems consistent with other institutions of higher education. So it doesn't feel like we're changing it now, but certainly the conversation is happening, and really on how to best help our students succeed and make it so that the extra time is not unhelpful, but is helpful. And I think it's really around the break that a student's taking from another course.
Rachel, we also have another comment. Can I read this to you really quick?
Yes.
So Nina Bell asked a really important question, and I think I'm going to reframe it a little. And Nina, if I get this wrong, please correct me in the chat. Excuse me. She says, Nina says that she's had several students that have received accommodations for what she would consider strange issues, such as a broken toe or an ankle sprain. She's surprised if anyone has a doctor's note, can they get an accommodation? And I would frame that in this question, Rachel.
Sure.
When students come to Access and Wellness, do they always, because of privacy laws, they don't necessarily have to indicate everything that's wrong with them to a faculty member, and they may hedge the truth or couch the truth and say something that's lesser. Is that something that you see, or am I way off base? Can you talk to that?
Yep, not off base, and thank you for putting that in, Anina. I'm sorry, I think they may have arrived very similar timing and I missed it. So thanks, Mike, for bringing it to my attention. So the answer to if anyone has a doctor's note, can they get accommodations, is no. What I think Mike's question really speaks to is And you'll notice, for those of you who have seen our authorized accommodation form, and even for those who have not, to tell you, it does not indicate what students' diagnosis is or disability or the reason that they are receiving accommodations. And that's actually a swing in best practices in disability in higher education in the past, I'd say 5 years. And I believe that our authorized accommodation forms actually did used to indicate what the disability was for students, and at my previous institution did as well. But in the past 5 years, it's really been about student first. These are the accommodations that a student is eligible for. Another office has vetted that, has seen the documentation, has worked with this student, and it's not on the student to have to disclose that information. And I do think when asked, many times a student does not want to disclose what is the real issue, and so will feel like so first of all, we cannot ask a student what their disability is, right? That is their right to disclose if they want to, but it's not a question we should be asking students. And I think when students get in a position where they feel like they might have to justify it, they tend to choose something that really doesn't justify it. Now, if a student, and I believe that, Nina, students definitely are volunteering. And, I think we've had students who've had, I've worked with a number of students who've recovered from car accidents comes to mind, because that happens unfortunately more frequently than not. And though the injury may be something that doesn't feel like it's impacting, it's the medication, it's the surgery, it's the time away from class. And I think some of those things may be compounding. So we don't just give accommodations to anyone that's asking for them. And many times I do think students are disclosing something that is a piece of the puzzle, but not a full picture. Thanks, Nina. Any other questions hanging out there in our last few minutes? Really appreciate you all taking the time to come hang out with us today. And you can see our contact information should still be up on the screen. Really want to emphasize that we're here to be partners with you as much as for students. So I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us. Thank you.
All right. Well, if there are no further questions, I will go ahead and wrap this up. I just want to thank you, Rachel. It was an excellent presentation. The information you gave is very applicable to our daily lives, not just the faculty, but also the people that support the faculty. So thank you for your time. And
thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you to all the audience members who joined us for this session today. Please enjoy the rest of TLC.